How's this for nightmare fuel? The FBI estimates that there are anywhere from 25 to 50 active serial killers roaming the US right now, with many more lurking in the shadows around the world, and we only know about a few of them. Piecing together what's going on deep in Russian territory is always a bit of a challenge, and the case of the serial killer dubbed the Danilovsky Maniac is no different. This killer claimed the lives of a series of victims between 2004 and 2007, and was given his nickname after the remains of one woman were discovered on Danilovsky Street in Sharapovets, Russia. The victims were killed in horrible ways. One woman was stabbed multiple times, while another had her liver removed. Another victim was found stuffed in a water-filled sewer. And here's the shocking thing. Law enforcement knows quite a lot about the Danilovsky Maniac. In addition to having a fairly good description of him, heavy-set, dark blonde with patchy hair, gray eyes, and between 35 and 40 years old, there have also been multiple witnesses who saw someone tagging walls with the X-rated graffiti that showed up around each killing. Perhaps even more shocking is that material recovered from beneath the fingernails of the victims has allowed for the identification of the killer's DNA. But with nothing to match it against, the Danilovsky Maniac remains unidentified. In the late 1990s, Pietermaritzburg, the capital of the South African province of KwaZulu-Natal, was rocked by a spate of killings believed by authorities to be the work of a single individual. At a minimum, 13 women were found dead, all believed to be sex workers who were evidently murdered in the same way. Each was strangled to death with their own undergarments. Local investigators were baffled, and after the killer went dormant and the manhunt proved fruitless, the case went cold. But the mysterious murderer, dubbed the Sleepy Hollow Killer, may have begun killing again in 2007. Over the course of the year, the bodies of 3 women were found in various locations around the city, killed and discarded according to the Sleepy Hollow Killer's methods. The one difference between these murders and the older ones was that the newer bodies had been burnt as if to prevent victim identification or destroy evidence. A task force was formed in January 2008 to determine if the 2 sets of murders were linked, but the Sleepy Hollow Killer was never apprehended. When it comes to tracking serial murderers, law enforcement agencies have tons of resources at their disposal, including the Murder Accountability Project, or MAP. Created by investigative journalist Thomas K. Hargrove, MAP is a database that collects information from various law enforcement agencies and compiles it into a massive file on murders.
I really know very little about serial killers. I do know what they look like in data.
Algorithms designed to find patterns in the data suggest that there are multiple serial killers stalking the indigenous women of the Americas.
We are the accountants of murder in America.
After examining the data, Western University criminologist and MAP Board of Directors member Michael Arntfield suggested patterns that lit up both the Atlantic and Pacific coasts along with a series of truck stops, indicating that serial killers are hunting along the highways. Arntfield believes many of them are truck drivers.
The Highway Serial Killing Initiative has about 400 to 450 offender profiles of unidentified subjects on its database alone that are involved in the trucking industry.
Those numbers are just for the US, but there is some good news. With the discovery that serial killers often worked as long-haul truckers, the industry created Truckers Against Trafficking training programs that teach drivers to recognize signs of human trafficking. The programs have saved hundreds of lives, but there's still a lot of work to do, as evidenced by the 2025 discovery of the remains of 2 more indigenous female victims in Manitoba, Canada. Sao Paulo, Brazil hosts one of the largest gay pride events in the world. In 2008, around 3.5 million people flooded the streets to celebrate. But just a few months later, the city was shocked by a series of murders targeting gay men. There's a great deal of anti-LGBTQ+ violence in Brazil to this day. Law enforcement believed the murderer was killing queer people who, in his warped worldview, didn't deserve to live. There were 13 confirmed victims of the serial killer stalking Sao Paulo streets, although there were also several more possible victims. Starting with the murder of 32-year-old Jose Cicero Henrique, the killer was dubbed the Rainbow Maniac or the Paturas Park Killer, since that's where a number of the victims were discovered. In 2008, an arrest was made there, and at first glance, it seemed like there was a pretty good case against the guy. Witnesses had come forward to claim they'd seen a retired police officer named Jairo Francisco Franco shoot and kill one of the men found dead in Paturas Park. Franco was tried for the murders, but he was found not guilty by the jury and immediately released. To date, the killer has never been satisfactorily identified. Meanwhile, violence against Brazil's LGBTQ+ community continues to rise. In 1992, Antonia Gomez, Miriam Garcia, and Desiree Hernandez were attacked, raped, and killed while on their way to a high school party in the Alcácer region of Spain. There were 2 suspects in the case, but only Miguel Ricart was arrested, tried, and eventually sentenced to 170 years in prison. But in 2013, Ricart was released after only 16 years because of some legal issues with the European Court of Human Rights. Meanwhile, Ricart's alleged partner in the murders disappeared. In 2021, Spanish courts ordered the reopening of the case into Ricart's alleged accomplice, Antonio Anglés. He's been at the center of a series of allegations that include the possibility that he fled to Brazil, underwent extensive plastic surgery, and is now unrecognizable. In 1993, a ship called the City of Plymouth reported a stowaway on board. The captain identified the man as Anglés, and the stowaway fled into Dublin. Whether it was actually Anglés, nobody knows, but what is certain is that his reported arrival in Dublin coincides with the disappearance of a 27-year-old woman named Annie McCarrick. Spanish and Irish law enforcement have suggested the possibility that Anglés was linked to several other disappearances in the years following his reported escape to Irish shores, and the widespread reopening of the case leads to the hope justice might be served. As of November 2025, Anglés is still at large. Between 2022 and mid-July 2024, 42 women disappeared from the area surrounding the Kenyan capital city of Nairobi. On July 12, 2024, residents of the Makura-Kwan-Njenga area came across 6 bodies in an abandoned quarry used as a garbage dump. An investigation began, and 3 days after discovery, authorities arrested Collins Jumaisi Khalusha. When police questioned him, Khalusha confessed to coercing, murdering, and dumping the remains of a total of 42 women. Khalusha's first victim was his wife. He strangled her, removed her limbs, and placed the torso in a sack that he threw into the dump site located about 300 feet from his home. This method of killing and disposing of the body became his signature. Within days, a total of 9 bodies, all women between the ages of 18 and 30, were found in the quarry. But while the case was essentially solved, the man who confessed to the crimes remains at large. In August 2024, Khalusha escaped from the police station where he'd been in custody for about a month.
It's an extraordinary case that really highlights the deep mistrust that the Kenyan public has in its security services.
Authorities say that Khalusha and 12 other criminal suspects were freed from the facility with the help of 5 sympathetic officers. Khalusha and the others made a break for it after slicing through a mesh roof and navigating an outer wall. In August 2019, a suspected serial killer in Culiacan, in the western Mexican state de Sinaloa, differentiated themselves with a ghoulish identifying characteristic. Within days, 5 bodies were discovered across 3 sections of the city. All the victims were men, and their bodies displayed signs of torture. They were left face down with toy cars placed on their backs. Investigators determined that the murder victims may have been car thieves, and local media theorized that the volume of little cars on their person was related to how many automobiles the killer thought they'd stolen. Interestingly, none of the victims had ever been charged with any sort of crime. Locals nicknamed the enigmatic vigilante serial killer El Juguetero, Spanish for the Toy Man. On August 4, 2019, police discovered El Juguetero's first victim with 11 cars on his back and 1 placed in his hand. Later that day, 2 more victims were found, each with 13 toys. The 5th victim was killed just hours after a video of the man staging an armed vehicular robbery was distributed around Culiacan. Between April 8th and May 7, 1992, 6 people were shot and killed along a stretch of I-70. The deaths occurred between Terre Haute, Indiana and Wichita, Kansas, and there were striking similarities between the victims. 5 were women, though police believe that the 6th was mistaken for a woman when the killer saw his long ponytail. All were brunettes, all were employees at stores just off the highway, and all were killed with a .22 caliber bullet. There was no sexual assault, no major thefts, and witnesses were able to give police a basic description of a man seen entering the stores before the murders. He was described as white with reddish or light brown hair, between 140 and 160 pounds, and around 5'7". The spring of 2022 marked the 30-year anniversary of the still unsolved murders, and police wanted to make it clear that the case is still very much open. In late 2021, law enforcement released a new sketch of the killer. Based on those witness accounts in this new sketch, there's still hope that someone will come forward with more information.
I definitely do think that it is solvable, especially with what we have to our advantage nowadays.
They've also released what they believe might be the key to catching him, a description of the gun. Wichita Police Detective Tim Relf told the press that they believe that it's a replica of an old German Navy pistol, one with a barrel so long that it has a wooden forearm. On November 20, 2006, 2 women who were out for a walk made a grisly discovery. The bodies of 4 women had been neatly discarded behind the Golden Key Motel in a suburb outside of Atlantic City. The women were fully clothed, except for their shoes and socks, and had been positioned face down facing east in a line behind the motel. The victims had all been strangled, earning their unidentified killer the nickname of the Eastbound Strangler. Law enforcement said that at the time there was definitely no shortage of suspects. One by one, however, they were clear of the murders until ultimately there were no more. An appeal for information on the 4 murders was reissued in the last days of 2021, with Chief of County Investigations Bruce Shields saying, 15 years later, we have not made an arrest for these homicides, but we're always looking, we're always working and re-examining information about this case. We haven't stopped. We won't stop. A $25,000 reward has been issued for information leading to the killer's arrest, which can be shared with any local law enforcement bodies. The Albuquerque Journal calls Central Avenue a high crime area, and it first earned that reputation back in 2001 when women started going missing more often than usual. Almost a decade later, on February 2, 2009, a human bone found by a woman who was out for a walk ended up being part of a crime scene on a scale that no one could have imagined. Ultimately, 11 women and one unborn child were found and identified, all of them attributed to the so-called West Mesa bone collector. Their life stories were varied. While many had connections to the drug and sex trade, others did not. Selania Edwards was just 15 years old when she disappeared, and 22-year-old Michelle Valdez was pregnant. Hundreds of people were interviewed and many suspects were investigated. For a while, the APD believed they were closing in on the killer.
Our suspect pool is pretty solid.
However, their optimism was misguided, and the identity of the West Mesa bone collector remains a mystery. According to the city of Albuquerque, there is a $100,000 reward being offered for information about the killer. Any tips should be directed to investigator Pedro Lopez or given by Crime Stoppers. Back in 2019, the Chicago Tribune reported that police were assigning a designated task force to investigate the theory that there was a serial killer stalking the city. For many, it was an investigation that was long overdue. It came more than a year after the news outlet had run another story connecting the deaths of at least 75 women who had been killed, all via strangulation between 2001 and 2017. The Tribune's initial story ran in 2018, and even as law enforcement balked at calling it what it was, 4 more women turned up dead in the same manner.
The problem with law enforcement, local law enforcement, is the idea of don't say serial killer.
However, they did ultimately admit that a serial killer being on the loose was a distinct possibility. While they claimed that there was little concrete evidence to link the victims, the Tribune reported that others had seen a very large link. Most of the victims were black women. Fast forward to late 2021, and that's when a 3-part docuseries called The Hunt for the Chicago Strangler started streaming on Discovery+. At the time of the show's debut, Chicago police were still saying nothing to confirm or deny the existence of a serial killer. And at the same time, PBS says activists were demanding answers. Director Jennifer Anderson told them, "I think these women are not just a name on a spreadsheet or police file. They had real lives and were missing something because they're not here. They deserve justice." The bottom line is that no one really knows who is killing the women of Juarez, Mexico. The Seattle Times reported that law enforcement has said there's a likelihood that there's a serial killer prowling the streets of the city just a stone's throw from El Paso, Texas. And they've also suggested the almost countless women that have died in recent years were targeted because of gang activity. But no one knows for sure. Starting in the mid-1990s, hundreds of women began turning up dead. Many were dumped in the desert, many bore signs of trauma and abuse, and it didn't stop. In 2019, there were 1,006 victims added to a list, and those were just the ones law enforcement knows about. The crimes are falling under the umbrella of femicide. Whether the victims were targeted by a serial killer who preys on women or by an abusive partner, they were killed because they were women. In 2020, the high-profile murder of an artist named Isabel Cabanillas de la Torre catapulted Juarez's problems back into headlines. Scores of women took to the streets to protest and demand justice for Cabanillas and the hundreds of other women who have been murdered by killers who have never been identified, much less brought to justice. Every so often, there's a story that pops up that's so unbelievable, so terrible, that it's impossible to think that it's true. That's definitely the case with Pedro Lopez, a man who's been dubbed the Monster of the Andes. After being kicked out of his home as a child after assaulting his sister, Lopez grew up on the streets of Colombia. He traveled across South America, raping and killing as he drifted from one country to another. Nearly executed for his crimes in 1978, he was given a second chance by a missionary who put in a good word for him and unknowingly kept him alive to keep preying on more victims. It's unknown just how many people he killed, but the numbers are staggering. He confessed to killing as many as 2 or 3 people a week. In 1980, his estimated death toll in Ecuador alone was around 110. That's when he was arrested and given a 16-year jail sentence. After serving some time there, he was released early, thanks to good behavior, and sent back to Colombia. There, he was reportedly held in a psychiatric facility for a further 4 years. In 1998, he was deemed sane and released on a $50 bond.
It could either be that the psychiatrist really felt that he was recovered or that he faked it.
Unsurprisingly, he promptly vanished and he hasn't been seen since. His victim count is ultimately unknown. According to biography, the total is well over 300. Since the early 1970s, authorities have been finding discarded bodies in an area of Texas that runs along I-45, known ominously as the killing fields.
It's an easy place to dump a body, and you can get away with it.
However, it wasn't until the discovery of 4 specific bodies in the span of a little less than a decade that authorities began to believe that they might be dealing with a serial killer. Heidi Villarreal Fay went missing in 1983, and her remains turned up a few months later after a dog dug up her bones. A little less than 2 years later, the remains of 16-year-old Laura Miller were found not far from where Fay had been left, and during that investigation, a 3rd body was found. She was known as Jane Doe until she was finally identified in 2019. Her name was Audrey Lee Cook. A 4th body was discovered in 1991 and known as Janet Doe until she was properly identified in 2019. Her name was Donna Gonsulin Pradam. According to the FBI, there are no known connections between the victims, and no witnesses have come forward to shed light on what happened to the women in their last moments. The Washington Post says that there have been plenty of suspects and even some false confessions, but the investigation had stalled completely between the discovery of the 4th victim and the discovery of their identities, while 4 families have spent years wanting to know what happened in those Texas fields. With the identification of the final 2 victims, law enforcement has once again issued an appeal to the public, with Special Agent Richard Renison saying, "Anything anyone in the public knows, no matter how small they think it is, we really want them to come forward because it may be very significant to us." If there's anything more terrifying than a serial killer with a type, it's a serial killer who chooses victims randomly. And according to what former Little Rock, Arkansas Police Chief Keith Humphrey had to say in a statement issued on April 29, 2021, that's what the city was facing. At the time of the statement, there had been 4 attacks and 3 had been fatal. They had all taken place in the wee hours of the morning, and KATV Little Rock reported that the first victim, 64-year-old Larry McChristian, was killed in August of 2020. The second victim, 62-year-old Jeff Welch, was attacked and killed about a month later. The killer fell silent for a bit until stabbing a 43-year-old woman 15 times on April 11, 2021. She survived, but the following day, 40-year-old Marlon Franklin was attacked and killed. Law enforcement issued an appeal for any witnesses or surveillance camera footage that might have caught the suspect or attacks, and by the end of April, they posted the footage to their YouTube channel. The footage was dark, grainy, and gave no identifying markers away, and in spite of a $20,000 reward promised for anyone who would give information leading to the suspect's apprehension, he remained at large.
We will do everything possible to arrest this suspect and protect our city.
From 2005 to 2009, the bodies of 8 women were discovered in Jefferson Davis Parish, Louisiana. At first, there didn't seem to be any connection between them, as there often is when it comes to serial killers. They range in age from 17 to 30, they vary in race, they were found in different circumstances, and they were killed in different ways. Eventually, though, the similarities came to light. All 8 women were local to the area, they knew each other, had criminal records, and according to what private investigator Ethan Brown discovered, they were all involved in sex work and relaying information about the area's drug trade to law enforcement.
You may be a drug user yourself, but you provide information to the police in exchange for something.
When local law enforcement kept coming up empty and bodies kept dropping, Brown went to investigate. He says that he got a taste of what was wrong when he showed up at the murder scene of local dealer David DeShotel, only to find people coming, going, and helping themselves to some souvenirs along the way. Brown set up shop to investigate and claimed he turned up not incompetence, but misconduct. When more bodies turned up during his investigation and he connected them with evidence given in the earlier murder cases, he claimed that something was indeed rotten in Louisiana. The cases remain unsolved. Yellowhead Highway 16 is the only major link between the 2 isolated rural communities of Prince George and Prince Rupert in central British Columbia. The 450-mile route runs through forested areas with limited cell service, making it a place where a serial killer, or perhaps a few murderers, have operated without capture since 1969. That's when Gloria Lavina Moody, a 27-year-old woman, disappeared on Highway 16. Moody is believed to be the first victim of an unidentified Highway of Tears killer. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police created the EPANA Task Force in 2005, which officially recognizes 18 victims. But Indigenous communities say that the number of dead Native women and girls could number up to 80. Over the course of more than 50 years, authorities haven't been able to arrest or stop the murders of First Nation women in British Columbia, many of whom were hitchhikers. The most recent death associated with the Highway of Tears, Chelsea Kwa, who lived near Prince George. Her remains were found near Highway 16 in November 2023.